Felix slammed the brakes of his sleek black sedan right in the middle of a bustling avenue in downtown Chicago. The crisp morning air of the windy city whipped against his tailored suit as he stepped out, entirely ignoring the symphony of furious car horns erupting behind him. He knelt on the unforgiving pavement, his eyes captivated by two identical little boys, creating absolute magic out of the city's discarded trash. One of them cradled a battered acoustic guitar with missing strings, while his twin brother hammered out an intricate heart-thumping rhythm on a collection of dented tin cans and metal buckets. Felix had driven down this exact same street thousands of times over the past 5 years, his mind perpetually consumed by lucrative contracts, stock market fluctuations, and endless board meetings. He had always been in too much of a rush to notice the hidden beauty tucked away in the shadows of the towering skyscrapers that defined his corporate world. The two boys froze instantly, their small hands halting their performance as they stared at the wealthy stranger with a mixture of profound fear and ingrained suspicion. Ryan pulled the fractured guitar tightly against his frail chest, treating the broken instrument as though it were the most precious artifact on earth. Beside him, Gavin swiftly concealed his wooden drumsticks behind his back, his dark eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. Life on the unforgiving streets had taught these 10-year-old boys that men in expensive suits usually meant imminent trouble, harsh words, or a swift call to the local police department. Felix recognized that defensive posture immediately, and a sharp, unfamiliar pang of guilt struck his chest as he realized he had been one of those heartless men countless times before. He crouched lower, forcing a gentle smile onto his face, and asked them in a soft voice if they lived anywhere nearby, desperately trying to hide his authoritative tone. The twins exchanged a rapid, silent conversation through a single glance, an unspoken language forged by years of relying solely on each other for survival in a harsh world. Ryan finally spoke up, his voice incredibly thin, but laced with a surprising amount of fierce pride, stating clearly that they were not doing anything illegal or wrong. He explained that they simply played their music for the rushing commuters, hoping that a few kind souls might drop a couple of coins so they could afford a meager meal. Felix shook his head emphatically, raising his hands to show he meant no harm, and confessed that he had stopped his car simply because their immense talent had genuinely astounded him. He asked who had taught them to play with such incredible soul, to which Ryan replied that they had learned everything entirely on their own through sheer determination. They had found the shattered guitar behind a dumpster 2 years ago, repairing it painstakingly with scavenged wire and cheap glue until it finally produced a melody. Felix felt his throat tighten at the realization that these destitute children possessed more raw talent and dedication than the wealthy children whose parents paid thousands of dollars for private tutoring. Gavin demonstrated his skills once more, striking the cans with precise, deliberate movements, proving that his rhythmic perfection was not a mere accident, but the result of relentless practice. The younger twin admitted that they played from the early hours of the morning until the sun went down, finding joy in the music, even when the entire city ignored their existence. That simple admission hit Felix like a physical blow. He could not remember the last time he had done anything purely for the joy of it in the past 10 years. He asked if they had any family watching over them, instantly regretting the question as the boys stiffened, their fragile trust threatening to shatter completely under the weight of his words. Ryan defensively stated that they took care of themselves and needed absolutely no adult supervision, their pride acting as a fragile shield against the world's endless cruelties. Ignoring his vibrating phone and the fact that he was already late for a multi-million-dollar meeting with international investors, Felix asked the boys if they had eaten breakfast yet. The fierce hunger in their eyes warred with their street-smart mistrust, but they eventually admitted they were starving, though they refused to leave their precious instruments unguarded. Felix nodded understandingly, pointing to a warm, inviting bakery just 50 yards down the street, promising he would return shortly with enough food for both of them. He walked toward the shop, feeling a profound shift occurring within his very soul, realizing that everything he previously considered essential now felt entirely empty and meaningless. Inside the bakery, the rich scent of freshly baked bread made his own stomach rumble, reminding him of his own neglected needs amidst his chaotic, ambition-driven life. He ordered 3 massive sandwiches, large slices of chocolate cake, fresh fruits, and several bottles of orange juice and water, paying no mind to the total cost. The cashier asked with a polite smile if the children waiting outside were his sons, prompting Felix to pause, his heart skipping a strange beat as he looked out the window. He replied that they were not his children, but a sudden, overwhelming realization washed over him, making him whisper softly that he sincerely wished they were. Felix walked back to the sun-baked sidewalk, carrying the heavy paper bags, the oppressive Chicago heat, causing sweat to bead beneath the collar of his expensive designer shirt. For the very first time in his entire adult life, he did not care about ruining his luxurious clothes or the furious messages flooding his phone from his impatient business partner. When he set the bags down in front of the twins, he witnessed the most beautiful, hesitant smiles slowly spread across their dirt-smudged faces. The boys tore into the carefully wrapped sandwiches with a ravenous intensity that spoke volumes about the endless days they had spent battling gnawing hunger on the streets. Ryan took massive, desperate bites, chewing as quickly as possible, while Gavin chugged the sweet orange juice as though he feared someone might suddenly snatch the bottle away. Felix sat down directly on the filthy concrete, his expensive trousers soaking up the grime, simply watching them with a heart full of a sorrowful, protective affection. After devouring half of his meal, Gavin paused, using the back of his remarkably dirty hand to wipe his mouth, and looked at the wealthy stranger with wide, inquisitive eyes. The young boy asked why a man who did not even know their names would go out of his way to buy them such a feast. Felix remained silent for a few long seconds, genuinely searching his own soul for an answer that made sense of his sudden life-altering detour from his corporate path. He finally told them that they had reminded him of something vital he had long forgotten, that true passion, genuine love, and human connection were far more valuable than endless wealth. Ryan stopped chewing his young face, adopting an expression of profound seriousness as he gripped his makeshift guitar, studying Felix's eyes for any trace of an adult lie. The young boy asked, his voice trembling ever so slightly, if Felix was going to call the authorities to have them removed from their only safe corner in the city. Felix looked deep into Ryan's eyes and promised with absolute conviction that he would never do such a thing, assuring them they could stay there as long as they wished. However, he softly added that he wanted to discuss a different kind of future, with them a life where they would not have to sleep on the cold concrete ever again. He offered them real instruments, a warm bed, a safe home, and the chance to actually be children, instead of fighting for survival in a world that had abandoned them. The twins stared at him, their expressions a heartbreaking mixture of desperate hope and paralyzing fear, terrified that this beautiful promise was merely a cruel trap waiting to spring. Felix pulled a crisp white business card from his inner pocket, suddenly feeling incredibly foolish as he realized how meaningless this piece of cardstock was to 2 starving orphans. He flipped it over, grabbed a silver pen, and quickly scribbled his personal cell phone number, handing it gently to Ryan, who accepted it as though it were made of fragile glass. Felix explained that they could call him at any hour of the day or night, promising he would return to this exact spot the following morning if they were ready. He stood up slowly, his legs stiff from crouching, and walked back to his idling car, leaving the boys sitting amidst their garbage instruments, clutching the small white card. When Felix finally arrived at his towering corporate office building, His business partner, Mason, was pacing the reception area, his face flushed with a mixture of immense relief and burning anger. Mason practically shouted that the crucial Japanese investors had waited for over 40 minutes before leaving, warning that their entire company could lose $15 million because of Felix's inexplicable absence. Felix looked at his partner, truly seeing the deep stress lines around his eyes and the hunched posture of a man who measured his entire existence by his bank account. He calmly apologized for missing the meeting, but stated with unwavering certainty that he had been dealing with a matter of far greater importance than any business contract. Mason stared at him in utter disbelief, demanding to know what could possibly be more important than securing the biggest financial deal in the entire history of their company. Felix knew he could never adequately explain how two dirty children playing music on garbage had fundamentally shifted the axis of his entire universe in a matter of minutes. He simply asked Mason to trust him, promising to salvage the deal with the investors before retreating to his massive, silent corner office overlooking the sprawling city below. He spent the remainder of the afternoon mechanically responding to urgent emails and rescheduling the lost meeting, but his mind constantly drifted back to the two boys holding on to that white card. When the sun finally began to set, casting a golden hue over Chicago, Felix packed his briefcase and left the office feeling a profound detachment from the corporate world he once worshipped. He drove past the spot where he had met the boys, slowing his car to a crawl, but the sidewalk was completely empty, leaving a cold void in his chest. Returning to his luxurious but agonizingly empty penthouse apartment, he walked out onto the expansive balcony, looking down at the thousands of tiny lights scattered across the urban landscape. He spent a sleepless night tossing and turning in his massive bed, praying that the boys would be there in the morning, terrified that he had lost his only chance at redemption. The following morning, Felix woke up hours before his alarm was set to ring, abandoning his usual expensive suits for a comfortable pair of denim jeans and a simple cotton shirt. He drove straight to the bustling intersection, his heart hammering against his ribs as he parked his car and scanned the crowded sidewalk for any sign of the two small boys. For 15 agonizing minutes, the space remained empty, and a crushing wave of disappointment washed over him, convincing him that they had dismissed his offer as just another empty adult promise. Just as he was about to give up and return to his hollow life, he spotted two small figures trudging down the block, lugging their heavy makeshift instruments behind them. When Ryan and Gavin saw Felix actually waiting for them, their steps faltered, their eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock, clearly having believed that he would never truly return. Felix approached them with a wide, genuine smile, noting the way their defensive postures melted away, replaced by hesitant grins that radiated a fragile, newfound hope. He asked if they had eaten breakfast, and when they silently shook their heads, he guided them down the street to a warm, brightly lit diner that smelled of fresh pancakes and maple syrup. He led them to a comfortable booth by the window, ignoring the critical stares of the waitress, who eyed the boys' tattered, dirt-stained clothing with obvious disdain. Felix ordered 3 massive plates of eggs bacon and toasted bread, insisting that the boys eat right there at the table, instead of taking the food back to the dirty streets. As they ate, savoring every warm bite, Felix gently explained his grand plan, assuring them that he had no intention of throwing them into a crowded orphanage or separating them. He described his massive, empty apartment, promising them their very own bedrooms, hot meals every single day, proper schooling, and professional music lessons to nurture their incredible, undeniable talent. Ryan looked up from his plate, his young eyes narrowed with the tragic wisdom of a street survivor, and asked what Felix secretly wanted from them in return for such luxury. The question broke Felix's heart all over again, exposing the deep scars of betrayal these children carried, forcing him to look them straight in the eyes with absolute sincerity. He promised them that he wanted absolutely nothing in return, confessing that his life was completely empty and that helping them gave him a purpose far greater than amassing wealth. Gavin, his voice barely above a whisper, admitted his greatest fear that they would get used to a soft bed and warm food, only for Felix to change his mind and kick them out. Felix reached across the table, his voice steady and full of fierce determination, swearing that he was fully committed to this path and would never, ever abandon them. Tears welled up in Ryan's eyes as he finally allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a real home extending his small, grimy hand across the wooden table. Felix grasped the boy's hand firmly, sealing a silent, sacred pact between them before Gavin excitedly offered his hand as well, solidifying the formation of their new unconventional family. After paying the hefty breakfast bill, Felix informed the boys that their very first stop would be a local health clinic to ensure they were healthy and strong for their new life. He guided them to his luxurious car, opening the rear doors and allowing them to carefully place their precious trash instruments onto the soft cream-colored leather seats. The drive to the community clinic was filled with a tense but hopeful silence, the boys staring out the tinted windows at the towering Chicago skyline passing by. Inside the clinic, the waiting room was packed with coughing patients and crying infants, but Felix spoke quietly to the receptionist, managing to secure a prompt appointment for the twins. A kind middle-aged nurse named Clara called their names, her tired eyes softening with deep compassion when she saw the unkempt state of the two small boys standing before her. She weighed them, shaking her head sadly, as she noted they barely tipped the scales at 45 pounds, each a severe indication of the chronic malnutrition they had endured. Nurse Clara gently examined their ears, throats, and lungs, speaking to them in a soothing maternal tone that made Gavin relax his tightly clenched shoulders for the first time. She informed Felix that the boys would need a comprehensive series of vaccinations and blood tests to check for underlying deficiencies, asking if he was their biological father. Felix paused for a fraction of a second before answering with profound certainty that he was their guardian, realizing that the title felt more right than anything else in his life. The boys bravely endured the sharp sting of the needles, holding tightly to one another, finding comfort in the unbreakable brotherly bond that had kept them alive for so long. Leaving the sterile environment of the clinic behind, Felix steered his sleek vehicle toward one of the most exclusive high-end shopping malls located in the affluent suburbs of the city. As the automatic glass doors slid open, a blast of crisp air-conditioned air hit their faces, causing Gavin to shiver and pull his thin, tattered shirt tighter around his small frame. The sheer magnitude of the brightly lit corridors, the echoing classical music, and the dazzling storefronts overwhelmed the boys, who instinctively shrank closer to Felix's protective presence. Felix placed a reassuring hand on each of their small shoulders, guiding them gently through the sea of wealthy shoppers, ignoring the sideways glances directed at the boys' dirty appearance. They entered a premium children's clothing boutique where an impeccably dressed sales clerk named Chloe approached them, her professional smile freezing instantly upon inspecting the twins' ragged state. She looked from the boys to Felix's casual but obviously expensive attire, her tone dripping with barely concealed condescension, as she asked if she could be of any assistance. Felix stated firmly that he needed a complete extensive wardrobe for both boys, including trousers, shirts, winter coats, undergarments, and high-quality sneakers, requesting at least 7 full outfits each. Chloe hesitated clearly, assuming Felix wanted to find the clearance rack for such unkempt children, and began pulling out the cheapest, most basic garments hidden in the back of the store. Felix stopped her with a sharp, authoritative voice, demanding that she show them the absolute best, most comfortable clothing the boutique had to offer, regardless of the exorbitant price tags. He crouched down to eye level with Ryan, and Gavin softly encouraging them to pick out whatever colors or styles they genuinely liked, empowering them to make their own choices. Gavin timidly reached out his trembling fingers, brushing against a thick forest green sweater, looking up at Felix for permission before clutching the soft fabric tightly to his chest. Ryan selected a charcoal gray hoodie, handling the garment with extreme reverence, completely unaccustomed to possessing something entirely brand new and untainted by the grime of the city streets. Once the massive pile of clothing was rung up at the register, Felix handed over his platinum credit card without a single flinch, ignoring the astronomical total displayed on the screen. He asked the boys if they wanted to change into their new clothes immediately, but they silently shook their heads, expressing a deep desire to wash away the street dirt first. They loaded the heavy shopping bags into the spacious trunk of the car, the fresh scent of new fabric replacing the metallic, dusty smell of the boys' beloved makeshift instruments. The 20-minute drive to Felix's luxury apartment building was filled with a nervous, electric anticipation, the boys realizing that their lives were about to change forever once they crossed the threshold. The building's uniformed doorman greeted Felix warmly, though his eyes widened in utter confusion when he saw the two filthy children trailing behind the wealthy businessman like lost ducklings. Felix proudly introduced Ryan and Gavin to the doorman, boldly stating that the boys would be living with him permanently, leaving no room for questions or unwarranted judgment. In the mirrored elevator ascending to the penthouse floor, the twins caught a full glimpse of their own reflections, staring in shock at how small and dirty they truly appeared. When the polished doors slid open, Felix unlocked his massive minimalist apartment, gesturing for the hesitant boys to step onto the pristine, gleaming hardwood floors of their new home. Felix led them down a wide hallway, opening the doors to two large, beautifully furnished guest bedrooms that had remained entirely vacant since the day he purchased the luxurious penthouse. He told Ryan and Gavin that these rooms belonged entirely to them, emphasizing that they would never have to sleep on a cold, unforgiving sidewalk ever again in their lives. The boys stood frozen in the center of the rooms, overwhelmed by the sheer size of the comfortable beds, the soft rugs, and the breathtaking view of the city skyline. Overcome by a wave of pure, unadulterated relief, the twins embraced each other tightly, silent tears streaming down their dirt-streaked faces as the reality of their safety finally set in. Fighting back his own tears, Felix gently interrupted their embrace, directing them to the two separate pristine bathrooms located just across the hall, supplying them with fluffy towels and fragrant soap. He left their new clean clothes folded neatly on the counters, instructing them to take as much time as they needed to wash away the heavy burdens of their past. While the sound of running water echoed through the previously silent apartment, Felix stood in his sprawling, high-tech kitchen, pulling fresh ingredients from the refrigerator to prepare a hearty meal. He chopped vegetables and seasoned chicken with a newfound sense of joy, marveling at how a quiet, lonely apartment suddenly felt like a real, vibrant home, filled with profound purpose. 20 minutes later, the boys emerged from the hallway, their faces scrubbed clean, their damp hair combed back, looking incredibly handsome and completely transformed in their brand-new clothing. Felix served them massive, steaming plates of white rice, savory beans, and roasted chicken, watching with immense satisfaction as they devoured the home-cooked meal with polite but ravenous enthusiasm. After clearing the plates, Felix settled them onto his massive white leather sofa, turning on a popular cartoon to keep them entertained while they digested their very first proper dinner. As the animated characters danced across the massive flat-screen television, Felix retreated to his home office, preparing to face the daunting task of finalizing the massive corporate deal he had neglected. The following morning, the reality of Felix's dual life crashed down upon him. He absolutely had to attend the rescheduled meeting with the Japanese investors or face complete corporate ruin. He prepared a simple breakfast of toast and fresh juice for the boys, explaining gently but firmly that he needed to leave for a few hours to handle important business matters. He promised faithfully that he would return by lunchtime, locking the front door behind him to ensure their safety, leaving them with instructions on how to use the television and find snacks. The drive to the corporate headquarters was agonizing, his mind constantly flashing back to the nervous, wide-eyed expressions the boys wore as he stepped out of the apartment. The high-stakes meeting took place in a glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor, surrounded by stern executives and his incredibly anxious partner, Mason, who paced the floor relentlessly. Despite the heavy distraction weighing on his heart, Felix delivered a flawless, compelling presentation using every ounce of his seasoned business acumen to secure the $15 million investment deal. The investors were thoroughly impressed, signing the contracts with firm handshakes, and Mason practically collapsed with relief, praising Felix for pulling them back from the absolute brink of financial disaster. Yet while his colleagues celebrated the massive monetary victory with expensive champagne, Felix felt completely detached, his only desire to rush back to the two little boys waiting in his home. He made a hasty exit, practically sprinting to his car, and drove back to his building, breaking several speed limits in his desperate rush to fulfill his promise to the twins. When he finally unlocked the apartment door, his heart plummeted into his stomach. Ryan and Gavin were sitting completely frozen on the edge of the sofa, exactly where he had left them. Their eyes were red and swollen from crying, and the moment Felix stepped inside, they jumped to their feet, their small bodies trembling with a mixture of overwhelming relief and lingering terror. Ryan's tough exterior completely crumbled, and he sobbed openly, confessing that they truly believed Felix had realized they were too much trouble and had abandoned them forever, just like everyone else. A sharp physical pain pierced Felix's chest as he dropped his briefcase, crossing the room in 3 large strides to pull both boys into a fierce, desperately protective embrace. He held them tightly against his chest, feeling their small hands clutch his shirt with a heartbreaking desperation, waiting patiently until their violent, frightened sobs slowly subsided into quiet hiccups. He looked them directly in the eyes, his voice thick with raw emotion, and swore that he would never, under any circumstances, walk out of their lives or break his promise. He told them that he did not expect them to trust him immediately, but promised to prove his unwavering loyalty every single day until they felt completely and unconditionally safe. To help them process their anxiety, Felix ordered a massive pizza for lunch, changing the atmosphere in the apartment from tense fear to one of casual, comforting domestic warmth. As they ate the cheesy slices, Felix pulled out his laptop and began making a series of important phone calls, organizing the complex logistics of their new stable lives. He contacted a highly recommended family lawyer to initiate the complicated legal process of gaining full permanent custody, determined to make the boys officially and legally his own sons. He then reached out to a prestigious local private school, arranging for the boys to undergo academic evaluations to place them in the appropriate grade level for their age. Knowing how deeply music ran in their veins, Felix did not stop at academics. He hired Mr. Harrison, a renowned music instructor, to come to the apartment 3 times a week. When Felix explained the upcoming schedule to the boys, Gavin's eyes lit up with excitement, but he hesitantly asked if they would ever be allowed to play on the streets again. Felix smiled warmly, assuring them that they could play their music wherever and whenever they wanted, but they would do it for the pure joy of the art, never again for survival. He promised that on the weekends, they could return to their old corner, sharing their incredible talent with the city, free from the burden of needing coins to buy their next meal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity filled with dentist appointments, eye exams for Ryan, who needed a pair of reading glasses, and endless meetings with social workers. The school evaluations revealed that while the boys had significant gaps in their formal education, they possessed a staggering raw intelligence that astounded the faculty and administrative staff. They were placed in a specialized classroom to help them catch up, and on their very first day, Felix sat in the parking lot for 4 hours, too anxious to leave them. When the final bell rang, the boys ran out of the brick building with massive smiles, excitedly telling Felix all about their kind teachers and the new friends they had made. The music lessons proved to be an absolute revelation. Mr. Harrison was completely blown away by Ryan's perfect pitch and Gavin's complex, intuitive understanding of rhythmic timing and percussion. Felix transformed one of the spare rooms into a fully equipped music studio, buying a top-of-the-line electric guitar and a massive professional drum kit that made the boys weep with joy. The chaotic, fast-paced life of a corporate executive faded into the background as Felix delegated his responsibilities to Mason, choosing instead to leave the office promptly at 5 o'clock every day. He discovered that helping them with their homework, cooking dinner together, and listening to their evening jam sessions brought him a profound, enduring happiness that money could never buy. Months turned into a beautiful, established routine, the harsh memories of the cold streets slowly fading into the background as the boys flourished in the warmth of a loving environment. Ryan transformed into a brilliant student, particularly excelling in complex mathematics, while Gavin discovered a deep passion for painting, covering the apartment walls with vibrant, expressive canvases of city life. Despite the luxurious comforts of their new existence, the boys remained incredibly humble, never losing the fierce protective bond that had kept them alive during their darkest, most desperate days. One crisp Saturday afternoon in the middle of autumn, Felix drove them back to the exact street corner where their paths had first crossed, carrying their new professional instruments. The boys set up their equipment on the familiar concrete, the towering skyscrapers of Chicago framing their small figures, and began to play a breathtaking, soulful melody that echoed down the avenue. A massive crowd quickly gathered around them, mesmerized by the sheer passion and incredible skill radiating from the two young musicians, applauding wildly when the final resonant chord faded away. Dozens of people stepped forward, dropping crisp dollar bills and handfuls of coins into the open guitar case, touched by the raw emotion the boys poured into their captivating performance. When the crowd eventually dispersed, Ryan carefully counted the money, looking up at Felix with a thoughtful expression that seemed far too mature for a boy of his young age. Ryan suggested that they take the money they had just earned and donate it to a local homeless shelter they used to frequent, acknowledging that they no longer needed the charity. Felix felt a familiar proud lump form in his throat, deeply moved by their profound empathy, and immediately drove them to the community center to hand over the heavy bag of cash. As they drove back to their warm apartment, the car was filled with a comfortable silence, until Gavin spoke up from the back seat, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. He looked at Felix's reflection in the rearview mirror and asked with a quiet, devastating sincerity if he and Ryan could officially start calling him their dad. Felix had to pull his expensive sedan over to the side of the bustling road, completely unable to see the traffic through the sudden thick veil of tears blurring his vision. He turned around in his seat, looking at the two boys who had completely saved him from a life of hollow corporate greed, and nodded his head with absolute, unwavering certainty. He told them, his voice cracking with immense emotion, that nothing in the entire world would make him prouder or happier than to be called their father for the rest of his life. The boys practically leaped over the center console, wrapping their arms tightly around Felix's neck, the three of them crying tears of pure joy in the cramped space of the vehicle. Just a few short weeks after that beautiful moment in the car, the final grueling bureaucratic hurdles of the complex adoption process were officially and legally cleared by the state court. Felix received the life-changing phone call from his dedicated lawyer on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the confirmation echoing in his ear that Ryan and Gavin were now legally and permanently his sons. He dropped the paperwork he was reviewing, ran out of his office building without saying a word to his bewildered staff, and sped directly to the boys' private elementary school. He burst into the main administrative office, demanding to see his children immediately, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he waited for them to appear from their classrooms. When Ryan and Gavin walked into the office, their faces etched with deep worry that they had done something wrong, Felix dropped to his knees right on the carpeted floor. He grabbed their small hands, looking at them with a smile that threatened to split his face in half, and announced that the judge had finally signed the permanent adoption papers. He explained that from this day forward, no one could ever separate them, that they were officially a family, and that they would stay together forever, no matter what challenges arose. The boys stood frozen for a fraction of a second before the realization washed over them, and they tackled Felix to the floor, laughing and crying loudly in front of the cheering school staff. That evening, to celebrate their new permanent legal status, the family went to the most extravagant burger restaurant in the city, ordering massive milkshakes, towering platters of fries, and decadent desserts. When the boys finally fell asleep that night, safely tucked into their warm beds, Felix stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at the city streets, with a profound sense of peace. He thought about the man he used to be, a hollow shell chasing wealth, and marveled at how two small children playing music on garbage had completely resurrected his dead soul. He knew that the journey ahead would not be perfect, that raising children came with immense challenges, but he also knew that he had finally found his true enduring purpose in life. Life is a profound journey that often teaches us its greatest lessons when we least expect them, usually hiding its most precious treasures in the places we overlook the most. As we grow older and the frantic pursuit of material wealth begins to lose its superficial shine, we realize that true success is never measured by the size of our bank accounts or the prestige of our professional titles. The legacy we leave behind is intricately woven into the lives we touch, the compassion we extend to strangers, and the love we nurture within the walls of our homes. Sometimes, stepping out of our rigid routines to simply listen to the world around us can rescue a soul in despair, and in doing so, miraculously save our own spirits from a life of cold emptiness. The most enduring joy does not come from what we accumulate, but from what we give away, proving that the strength of a family is born not from blood, but from an unwavering commitment to love, protect, and stand by one another through the darkest of times.